The board meeting, April 16th, special meeting regarding board policies. Our regular session is back in session. Mr. Matsuoka, Pledge of Allegiance.
Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Spanish interpretation. Okay. If needed, Ms. Trujillo will do Spanish translation for me. Thank you. And there are headsets available. Are there any public comments, non-agenda matters within the jurisdiction? Okay. Those that I'll do a report out from closed session. Item B1, the board voted in closed session to appoint Elena Garcia Yoshitomi as principal of McKinley Elementary School. Motion was made by Ms. Ford, seconded by Dr. Reed. The vote was 5-0. Okay. We'll move to item C1.
So, board, we packaged these by groups. The 0000 series is first because it's the lowest number. There's also some time-sensitive ones in there, given that we have a charter renewal coming to us from Adelante soon. We thought it's important that we get these charter-oriented policies in there. And then I thought the equity policy from CSBA, which is a new one, was very, very well written. So rather than, well, we could go through each one by one. So Mr. Rouse, if you would pull up. Thank you. I'm not going to add any preliminary comments. We'll just go straight to board. What questions, what edits would you like to add in? Philosophy. Comments, questions, language. Really modernizing language to catch up, I believe, to current day. These are very broad statements suggested by CSBA. Great. Hearing none. Ms. Ford.
I was just wondering if maybe for each one of them, like you could make some sort of a statement about them, or you know, whoever's kind of in charge of it, the person could possibly just say, here are what the major changes are, because it seemed to me, and in a lot of them, basically they were the same, or just sort of moving stuff around. And but then in others, there's new language that is inserted and must be important. So if you wouldn't mind, I don't know how my fellow board members feel, but I think it might be important, especially since it's being filmed, just to maybe give
be glad to.
Intro.
So the edits for this philosophy one were given to us almost 2 years ago. As I read through it, the language changes are in keeping with the running and leadership of a school district today versus, I can't remember how old the prior language was, but it felt like it was 8 or 9 years ago. So to me, this one is just capturing language, philosophical statements about where public ed is today and how it should guide our work.
Ms. Capps.
Sorry. The thing that tripped me up a little bit, it was actually the word philosophy. It's just sort of, I just haven't heard. I mean, really, to me, it seems more like vision, but it's just more of a curiosity of like philosophy. It's an interesting use of that word.
Yeah, I don't use the word philosophy much in my leadership because that seems like what you would learn in grad school. That's what Dr. Reed would teach, philosophy of education. So, but, it is the CSBA language that's been around for decades.
You have no comments?
All right, so what we will do is bring all of these back on consent. I don't think we'll get them turned around for next week's board meeting on the 23rd, so probably May 14th, okay? All right, the next one, goals for a school district. This one was really important for us to consider because the LCAP environment has now been with us. We were noting, is it 8 years? since 2013. So we are now 6 years into the LCAP era, roughly. And so it's really important that we update our language, that this topic of goals for a school district is connected to the language around LCAP. And then I shared with the board, per our conversation at our governance retreat, that we wanted to get the evaluation of the superintendent aligned to some broad strategic goals. So I sent a couple of those domains out in the Friday letter. We're working on a more detailed expansion of that by subgroups of what would we examine, really by August, I think. Although, Mr. Rouse, when do college career readiness data cycles come back? Is it?
It's been November, December.
Yeah. So CAS scores come back to us quickly in August, but the college career readiness will have to wait until probably November. Just takes the state some time. Okay. Comments? Ms. Ford?
Any reason why the deletion of the words and needs? Because in so many of the policies that we read and are being considered for tonight, it's all about student needs.
I have no opinion on it.
It is just what the CSBA suggested?
Yeah.
Okay.
Our students do have needs.
Yeah.
We can keep language in.
I like to have it
Okay.
in.
All right. So that's BP. Any other edits? Okay, with that, we'll bring that back with that minor edit and bring it back on consent. Okay. Board Policy 0415. By the way, are public comments?
Different items, number 3.
Number 3. What's
Yeah.
number 3? Oh, safety points. Okay. All right. So this is a new policy as of last summer, July 2018. When I read that second box, I thought it was really good. Really, really good. So comments, thoughts?
Dr. Reed?
I was just going to say, I'm surprised it's taken so long to have a policy formulated.
Yeah,
Topic.
at the California School Boards Association
Right.
level.
Right, and they were saying July 2018 is when it was launched.
Yeah.
So we were ahead of the game.
Santa Barbara's been ahead of the game by a decade plus. Yes. Comments, questions, input?
I'm just going to make a comment about, appreciating number 7, promoting the employment and retention of a diverse staff that reflects the student demographics of the community. That's excellent.
It is. It's so important. It's in our framework around cultural proficiency as our HR practices need to support that work.
Along with item 8, in terms of the ongoing research-based and professional learning and development, culture responsive. I appreciate that as well.
And we've been at that for over a decade and continue that work. Okay.
Yep.
Great. All right. We look forward to having this on the books for us. This is an important policy. Okay, so we'll bring that one back on consent. All right, next one, comprehensive plans.
We do have some.
Again, this is to reflect the shift towards LCAP, that our dominant comprehensive plan is our LCAP. There are other plans that we have to keep up to date on, but we wanted to make sure that this one is captured in policy, because as you review and approve the next iteration of the LCAP, we want that to reflect an accurate board policy.
We do have a request to speak on this item. On number 3? On number 3. Okay. Thank you. E3. Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Board Policy 0420. This one was updated pretty recently, only 5 months ago, December 2018. Just subtle changes in ed code. so that this policy aligns the school SIPSAs with policy. So that's the reason for this update. And by the way, the board will be reviewing and approving all the SIPSAs. We have that special board meeting in May. So for Ms. Ford and Ms. Munoz, we do a pretty interactive process. You know what? I should get it out to the board just as a reminder of not only the date, but the process. You'll get to interact with, I believe it is 4 or 3 schools. I'm looking at my Ed Services team.
3 or 4, depends on how it breaks down.
Yeah, okay. All right. Any questions on 0420? All right, we'll bring that to consent. All right, now we shift into charter schools. And this language, I apologize, this one should have been updated. We had 2 prior chances, 2015, 2017, now 2019. So we are catching up on some long-standing changes. The charter school oversight language is going to be especially important. We are watching the emergence of more responsibility of the sponsoring school district to monitor the work of district charters. So that's going to be Peabody, Santa Barbara Charter, and Adelante. We are even hearing through Susan Salcido that as our charters have red in dashboards, they have to submit their improvements to us. So that's actually going to be some work on our team. But we thought it's really important to get this policy updated. Questions?
Ms. Capps?
I had a question just about how this is enacted. The quarterly visits, are those happening?
You know, I saw in there, it said that the superintendent visits every charter school annually. Ooh, I need to get out there. I visited all of them my first year. I've been at Adelante a lot. It's a good reminder to me that I should be visible. We'll have to think about how we interact with our charters, you know, and we have a really good relationship with all 3 of our charters. But I think we need to have more interaction with them.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Reed?
I was just going to say that I do appreciate the outreach that the charter schools do make, certainly to the board, in terms of invitations from Santa Barbara Charter, from Adelante, and from Peabody. So they always seek our, come and visit and to understand what's going on. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, and that I appreciate that.
Yep. All right, we'll bring that board policy 0420.41 back in consent. Now, an exhibit, that was a long exhibit. If you actually got through, it was like 55 specific things that charters should be paying attention to. I included that just so that you could see what CSBA provides. That's really to give some guidance to our charter schools as they do their business and for us to monitor. Now, I don't think we're going to monitor every one of those 55 line items, but I thought it was a really good list of what charters should be paying attention to. Okay. All right, next one, BP 0420.42. So in light of the charter renewal coming to us, this one's really important to get updated. So there's just some updates in board policy that are important to have on the books.
So is it updating to something we should be doing or something that we're already doing? It's just changing the language?
I would say it's mostly just updating both. Are we doing everything in those policies? Hopefully. But there's a lot of detail in those. I think for us, we're going to have to be more intentional about spending time with our charters.
Dr. Reed?
Just a question. So with these policies that are updated, are they then shared with the charter schools that we are looking at these more closely or in a more detailed way?
I think after, actually in between these meetings, as these go to consent, we should send out a copy of all of these charter-related policies to all 3 of our charters. I'll send them the exhibit. I think it's good background info. We're not going to do, an examination of all of those, but they should be aware of what changes that we have to operate under. And then, I'm going to ask our 3 charter schools, how much do you guys work on your own policy set? Because they are their own independent operator. So, all right, any questions about charter school renewal? All right, last one is something we hope never happens, although I think in the history of the district, Cesar Chavez got close to that situation of a charter revocation. And so it's important for us to have that policy on the books and have it as updated as we need to. Any questions on that? Excellent. So thank you for your review of the 0 series. And now we can move on to the 6,000 series. So we have Dr. Ramirez and Ms. Carey who will guide you through those and respond to questions.
Hi, good evening, board. Pleasure to be here with you. I wanted to just let you know that these are all in the 6,000 series, as Mr. Matsuoka had indicated. And you'll see on the, just in the background, just a high-level view of what those changes entail or what precipitated some of those changes and modifications. I'm going to go ahead and take the first 3 and invite Ms. Carey to come to the podium for the last one. So in terms of 61, there are 3 that have to do with assessment or testing, and we just wanted to put them all together for you because they deal with different facets of assessment. The first one, 6162.5, around student assessment. That one really derives from changes having to do with LCAP and transitions to student assessments as a result therein. So the first one specifically calls for a balance of different assessment types to inform programming. Some of the additional content happens largely at the bottom. There we are. Where it alludes to interim and formative assessments and how they will be used in combination with other data points and data sets and pieces of information to guide progress, student progress, and monitoring of student progress, I should say, and adjust the instruction. And if you look at the very top, it's intended to also again, evaluate district educational programs in order to identify needed improvements. So the other piece that I should say here, and in this one, it may not be called out, but there are other points in time where the assessment is really put forward as a way of informing, very in keeping with the way in which the state is undertaking its work around the California School Dashboard. It's really intended to guide local decision-making rather than appear to be or become punitive in any way. So it's really laying out a perspective around that. So if the board has any questions, would certainly love to try to answer those or further comments.
Ms. Ford?
It's just a tiny note on the section that says interim and formative assessments. The words "and formative" are crossed out in the body of the paragraph, but not in the title.
Yes. We actually debated that point quite a bit, and we can bring that into alignment, but just to give you a bit of a sense in terms of the formative assessments, it
does talk about them later.
Correct.
So
correct.
I'm wondering why it was taken out there. I think results of all those types of assessments aren't supposed to be used for high stakes purposes.
The reason that we struck it from the body of it is because of the lack of standardized assessments in the lower grades, and understanding, for example, in TKK 1 and 2, some of those formative assessment types may be used to be able to inform progress, and that's probably one of the reasons that, or in later grades, wherever grades 9 and 10, let's say, where there's a lag in the last the last type of assessments, the last type of standardized assessments. But if I recall, that's where our conversation landed as an Ed Services Department. We can certainly bring it back to you in better alignment with the title, so that the title and the content more closely match. Do you have any recommendations, or does the board have any recommendations for us in that regard?
I think for me the clarification was helpful. So perhaps maybe just reviewing the paragraph again and seeing if there's some way that you could maybe adjust for K2, because I would say during a few in the reading of a few of these particular policies, it does seem like there's very little of a nod to K2.
Yes.
Especially with regard to assessments. And what you
Yes.
said is absolutely correct. So perhaps there's a way to sort of address it
Okay.
as a note on K2 in
Okay.
particular.
Okay. Thank you for that feedback. Okay. If it's okay, I'd like to move on to a different policy.
Yes.
Before we move on, would the board like to see that language around K2, or can we bring it back in consent? And if you see something, you could pull it out of consent. But I always like to get that clarity. So okay to move it into consent with K2 language. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. Next policy. 6162.51 state academic achievement tests. Sorry, looking at my own notes. This one again. This one actually introduces CASP as the prevailing system, shifting us away from STAR and bringing us current with practice. The part in green that is new language is something that happens actually for us in a couple of different installments. One is it calls for the board to annually examine state assessment results by school, grade level, and student subgroup. That's something that for us happens every fall, early in the fall, based on the prior year's assessment results. So that's a cultural practice for us, and it's something that we also revisit as part of our LCAP process with different groups and with the board. It's also represented in our LCAP, where you can see multiple years of this type of student performance by subgroup, by year. So if and last but not least, revised local control and accountability plans and other district or school plans. This is also very timely because you will be seeing in this coming month of May, school plans come to you for the coming year. We 2 years now reoriented the time when those school plans came before the board to ensure that we were taking a look forward and that the board had visibility to plans being made, not in real time, but rather with foresight in mind and really with a forward lean. So you'll see these results in a couple of different plans and events over the course of a year. So with that, I would like to just listen to any comments or questions the board may have.
Seeing Ms. Sport.
Quick question. What may not be necessary to answer tonight, but I'm wondering what kind of process is in place in the district to make sure that the school's SPSAs are aligned to the school's LCAP. So it was one of the hardest things for us to do, and so I'm assuming it's sort of hard to do here too. How do you do it?
It's hard to do, and you kind of served up a great opportunity for us to talk about. That has actually been a practice that we put in place over years. So you will see alignment, literally alignment, from the goals represented in single plans to the LCAP. So those two do speak to each other quite a bit. And we wanted to use the timing of the approval of the single plans to actually match and bolster the participation and feedback loops to the LCAP process. So we literally have a timeline that orients us internally to how those two processes speak to each other, and working interdepartmentally to make sure that preliminary budgets arrive at a certain time in order for principals and school leaders and school site councils to make informed decisions about their resources. The single plan will also refer back to an evaluation, which is now embedded into the school plan, which we use to document some of the funding that schools receive through supplemental funds. So it has taken us a few years, but we're now in better alignment. And in fact, that's what prompted us to move historically, at least prior to, just as I assumed my role, those were happening in the fall, which we knew was out of step with planning. And so school leaders recognize that. So we moved that a couple of years ago now to the spring. So now the board will see spring plans or plans coming in the spring that are for 1920 as opposed to happening in the fall of the current year.
Dr. Reed?
I was just compliment you on that, because I remember when that happened, that transition, and it was when I was like, well, why are we getting this, but we don't, this is already after the fact. So the change that we can see the future and then be able to reflect on the work that had been done, I thought was very comprehensive approach, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to offer up that was particularly stressful on our site leaders. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to respect their, and some are here who lived through that. So it was a hard year, but I think they saw and are starting to see the benefit of moving in that direction. So is it okay for us to move into the third?
Yes.
So the third that falls into the testing assessment realm is 6162.54. This has to do with test integrity and test preparation, and this is pretty much a straightforward board policy in that regard. It talks about how we will effectively keep to the integrity of the results by keeping to the integrity of the process. And so we, appropriate test preparation, it goes through those pieces. And some of these are actually very much embedded into the assessment type. So it's very common to have, particularly with standardized testing, to have staff and proctors really undertake a lot of care with the handling of those materials, just to ensure that the results are consistent with students' best efforts and not external conditions or factors. So this really delineates how those assessments are to be derived and how they are to be undertaken, and just really spells it out. Just one point of clarification is that there are additional protocols and procedures that are administered or undertaken depending on the assessment type. So, for example, the LPAC, which is our new version of the California English Language Development Test, that one has a very specific protocol because it deals with students at very distinctly different ranges and stages of their lives. So how it might look for a kindergarten student would be a bit different than how it would look for a student in 11th grade, for example. That's probably one of the ones that has the widest variety in terms of spanning all age groups. But I just wanted to offer that up, that there are additional guidance that are brought forward by the state in order for us to be able to to really optimize conditions and reflect on, may have them become reflections of student learning.
Ms. Capps?
Thank you. My suggestion here is that there's a lot of focus on sort of cheating, which is good, but really only the confidentiality is sort of could be unpacked. My recommendation is that we give it a bit more language. It's really just listed under point number 8, but yet I think it's deserves a bit more detail, especially given we had a bit of a snafu this year. We took care of it, and it was a human error or some kind of error, but I just think it's important that we emphasize it, and it really is only that other than that word, that's all there is in this whole policy.
Sure, we can make that more robust.
And I don't need to see it again. I just thought it deserved a bit more of an emphasis.
Thank you for that feedback.
I just had a question on the few strikeouts on the CF for the high priority schools grants program. What is that?
I'm sorry, can you?
It's at the top, at the very top there, with the strikeouts right there, the high priority school. I'm just trying to understand what those are.
Right, those are speaking to past eras of accountability. So before there were what were called PI, or Program Improvement Schools and Districts. So that was really hearkening back to an era before the federal government moved forward with the Every Student Succeeds Act. That would have been 2016, I believe. I'm getting my dates maybe mixed up, but in that shift from ESEA to ESSA, that language really became obsolete.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So I will turn it over to Ms. Carey.
Good evening, members of the board. Thanks to Dr. Ramirez for representing those first 3 policies, which of course apply to all our grade spans. This one does as well, Board Policy 6145 on extracurricular and co-curricular activities, although it's particularly pertinent to the secondary grade spans. So here I am to talk to you about a couple of high-level changes that I want to highlight. One is, and as we scroll through this, as Brian helps me do that, the additions, the enhancements to be clear about the eligibility for homeless students. And then I wanted to highlight that we locally added language that is in keeping with Assembly Bill 2121 passed last year about migratory students or newly arrived immigrant students as well. We thought that was really very comparable, as it is and as it's laid out in Assembly Bill 2121. So this is also the policy where we see, the explicit calling out about the prohibitions against pay to play. These are conversations that are very much ongoing in the secondary space. I'm very proud of our district's efforts over the years to clearly understand this at all levels of the system. It is an ongoing challenge as we have parents and booster organizations that also help support our programs and fundraise on our behalf, but we have taken steps even this last year to make sure that we refresh our training around this BP. Those are the things I had wanted to highlight. What questions or feedback might you have?
Ms. Capps?
Yeah, I was curious about the term homeless, as I know that there's a movement to refer to those people as houseless. And I just wondered if we've made that transition or if that's something that you, because it more reflects that they might have a roof over their head, but it's not a permanent one. And it's.
Dr. Wagner might be able to comment on that technically. I know that in our parlance now, we tend to say housing vulnerable. Mm-hmm. Because it does have a connotation, certainly informally, homelessness of a certain kind of homelessness, when we know what we really mean by the federal definition is students who may multiple families in the same dwelling. I think that's what houseless more accurately depicts. But it can mean other things too. It can mean students in very transitional settings.
Right.
When we use that broader term, housing vulnerable. But in this particular policy, we're talking about students who are officially sort of technically classified as homeless by that federal definition. And I'm not aware of any movement to change that term to houseless, but maybe Dr. Whiting.
Yeah, I think Ms. Carey's speaking specifically to McKinney-Vento, and the federal government within this definition still uses homeless, so we use it within the board policies, and I have a policy coming up later, but I would back up what she's saying in terms of we're trying to use more appropriate language when speaking, including using person first language when speaking about students specifically.
Ms. Ford?
I was wondering if this, I know you said this is mostly pertaining to secondary, but does this particular policy cover science camp and overnight field trips in the elementary, or is that in the field trip policy?
That would be field trip policy.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So is anything co-curricular in elementary school then? Or is this a secondary policy?
So in terms of what would be co-curricular would be some of the funding sources. And I think the example you cited would perhaps fall under both. Trying to think, science camp is probably the one that is the most commonly exercised or commonly undertaken. I would have to think that on the co-curricular experiences specifically. I know we've talked about these guidances, but they do happen to fall more squarely on the secondary schools. But I would have to think through what their direct application would be in more detail with our principals as far as elementary is concerned.
About theater, music, do they fall here?
There would. There would, because we have different programming in that space. I'm thinking about the activities that they undertake specifically. I would have to research that a bit more with our principals, but it would be readily applicable to elementaries as well.
It seems like it to me, and I think that if I'm confused, some principals might be too. So it might be really good to spend some time with principals so that they know what they can not charge for these little kids.
By and large, when it comes to the components of our VAPA program, there are very few instances that I can recall. Actually, there are no instances where I can recall where any charges have been made directly. We have, as you all know, a very gracious and supportive community. So music instruments, art supplies and materials, whether they be everything from just different media that are undertaken, and PE equipment are the three that come to mind, are not, they're not spaces where I've heard or it's come to my attention that we are charging any type of fees. They are effectively absorbed by instructional materials or thought of as instructional materials because those are components of our elementary programming. Just to answer your question directly around where some lack of clarity might emerge more starkly, but it will be something that I will continue to bring back to our elementary principals just to continue to keep it present in our minds.
Noted. Comments? You seeking to bring this back on consent. Is there any follow-up that you're going to need, Ms. Ford, with regards to your latest questions on that last policy? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So we do have 3 speakers for item number E3. C3, excuse me. Let's see. The first will be Bobby McGinnis. Great. Oh, you have 3 minutes up at the podium, and Ms. McGinnis, at the 30-second mark, I'll give you a gentle warning that you're almost done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, what caught my eye on the agenda tonight was the gun violence that's part of the safety issues for this school. And I've heard that the $600,000 that you're giving on the LAFCA funds for CALM is to prevent gun violence. So number one, I want to find out if that's true or not. Secondly, I wanted to know if you've researched any alternative forms of protection of teachers and students for gun safety. For example, the Parkland Highland parents have come up with having a dog on campus that will attack a gunman, even when a policeman might be afraid to go in. So I just wondered what our board is doing about researching alternative methods of protection, or is CALM our only solution? Do you guys get to answer?
No, so thank you for this. I think that you're new here in terms of speaking to us, and so this is just public comment where the board doesn't actually have a chance to respond because it's not been agendized for the public to listen to as well.
Okay, those are.
But thank you for raising these questions.
Okay.
Okay, next speaker on this item is John Morse.
Good evening. My name is John Morse. I'm a member of Fair Education Santa Barbara. Our purpose is to advocate for all students. I want to talk about the comprehensive safety plan and specifically about the intercom systems at Santa Barbara High School and Dos Pueblos High School. Santa Barbara, Fair Education Santa Barbara has filed Williams Act complaints about both of those systems. In short, they are at best intermediate and at worst basically non-functional, have been for some time. I'd like to emphasize the need to have fully functional intercom systems. In the event of an emergency, it would be necessary to provide instructions to students and staff. For example, in case there were an active shooter on campus, it would be crucial to have those systems functional so you could provide instructions about where to go and, more importantly, where not to go. In my opinion, this is a priority, and I would suggest that you get bids out as soon as possible so you can get those systems replaced, hopefully before the next school year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our final speaker, I apologize, I can't read the writing. It looks like Janice? I'm sorry, Jason? James.
I'll introduce myself.
Thank you. Thanks, James.
So my name is James Fenkner, and this is very nice because I think this is my third time to come speak here, and I think this is the first time I've actually gotten 3 minutes. So it's very nice to be able to express a full thought. I have 3 daughters in the district. I am also a member of this group, Fair Education, and one of the issues that's bothered me for a long time is this issue at Dos Pueblos with the intercom system. And I was told many times through many different folks at the school that, it's just not going to be repaired. And of course, school safety is not just an issue of guns. Again, as background, my wife and I, we contributed to the first gun buyback here in Santa Barbara. But it's also with information. If something goes on, if there's an earthquake or a natural event, a fire, anything, there's only a bell system at DP right now. And it's been that way for at least the last 3 years. My eldest is a junior. And it's a concern because you never know what's going to happen. There's 2,000 students, as you know, at DP. I have 2 of them in my family. It's been something out there. And then I discovered recently there's this bond issue that was passed a couple of years ago, I&J. I think it's about $200 million. And I'm sorry I didn't have a slide to bring up here, but it's itemized on this bond, this consolidated budget status report for Dos Pueblos, $350,000, also for some of the other schools, and none of it's been used. And so my question here is, what is the time that's necessary to implement this type of safety system in the school? And then secondly, I tried to get in touch with, there's an oversight board for this bond. And I only found people that have resigned or have been turned out. Is there some oversight of this?
30 seconds.
As well. So I've asked questions. I don't know actually how I'll get the answers. I come back after a while. I too am new here. So, communication is kind of a two-way thing. But anyway, those are my questions. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks for being here. And you can always submit questions to us over email, or you can talk to us afterwards if you'd like. Again, thank you for being here. Our email addresses are on the district website.
Mr. Master will have staff respond to the questions on the intercom systems. So staff will respond to those questions.
Hey, good evening, Board. I'll be bringing a series of board policies forward. The first tonight is the first reading and discussion of Board Policy 0450, which is Comprehensive Safety Plan. This update reflects new law AB 1747, which has several key pieces to it. One is that all districts and sites are to use the California Department of Education compliance checklist, which we actually have been doing for the last 2 years. So this policy is formalizing that practice. And also it specifically calls out that approved comprehensive safety plans should be shared with law enforcement, local fire departments, and other first responder entities. And finally, it also has a new addition in regards to tactical response plans, which very clearly has come out of our nation's response to gun violence and other types of violence on school campuses. And the key piece of this is that anytime that a tactical response plan is put in place, that there will be collaborations with law enforcement, but also the local bargaining units. So in our case, SBTA and CSEA. And finally, in regards to those tactical response plans, that the board will meet in closed session to confer in regards to those plans with law enforcement and announce the outcome in open session. So I think there may be questions about that, any of those pieces, but I will turn it over to you for questions or comments at this time.
Any questions from the board? Ms. Capps?
Yeah, I had a comment about timing. I appreciate that it's an annual process, and I know that this is probably what would be practiced, but I think it could be stated that again, big picture. I think, as you well know, Dr. Wagner, that these plans need to reflect changing conditions and emerging threats and mudslides and just different things. So acknowledgement of the fact that even though it's an annual process, that there would of course be opportunity to update and improve upon plans. Some sort of, otherwise it seems a bit static the way that it's written, that this is just an annual thing that we do once a year, but rather reflect the reality that it's an iterative process.
It is absolutely an iterative process, and if we haven't learned that in the last year and a half, we haven't learned anything. But I would say yes. As far as the law is concerned, we need to bring this to you for your approval annually, et cetera, et cetera. However, we are constantly improving our practices around safety and making additions. And so, for example, this tactical response plan, that's an addition that you're going to be seeing in advance of. So I think the best way to say it is, if we're making changes to our practices that will be reflected in the next plan, is to bring it to you as a board so that you're aware and perhaps do, updates every 3 to 4 months. But definitely the law says that when, and it's not if, but rather when we put that tactical response plan in place, which will be coming prior to the beginning of the next school year, that you all have an active role in that, as do our bargaining units and local law enforcement. So I think it's about communication and the iterative process.
Yes. I think it would be more comprehensive or more accurate if the policy then just reflected, just a half a sentence or a sentence added about regular communication as plans are improved upon, or something. I don't need to wordsmith it, but just something that reflects the dialogue that we have throughout the year, not just on an annual basis.
So I will add that. I would definitely add that in. And are you okay with that going to consent?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Okay.
I just had a question. Can you speak to the bargaining units? Can you talk about that a little bit more? Their relationship to this?
Kelly Moore and I actually had a discussion about this, and he's going to talk with representatives from the bargaining units to. There are two options. One is to involve bargaining unit members in our safety team, our committee. The other is to meet with them and review the tactical response plans in advance of ultimately bringing them to you all.
So what is the purpose of it? Is it to update? Are they not involved right now? Or is that new?
So, for example, if we were to go to the ALICE response method for alert and lockdown, that's going to require certain action on the part of teachers and staff. And I'm actually pleased to see it, because it again, it's communication about what the expectations are, and being able to listen to the representatives from the bargaining units about what maybe the fears or concerns are of the folks.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm just trying to make that relationship. So thank you for that explanation.
Thank you. All right. Good to bring that back on consent.
Yes, with those edits from Ms. Capps.
Okay. So moving on to the first reading and discussion of Board Policy 3515.7, Firearms on School Grounds. We're getting caught up on this policy, which actually reflects law from December 2017. It has always been our district's practice to not grant authorization for the carrying of concealed weapons, firearms on campus. What this does is actually, it would allow us to do that, but only it actually greatly limits it if we wanted to primarily a concealed weapon has to be something that would definitely be concealed, and it has to be unloaded and locked in a trunk or a container. So, and then it also adds language about what district employees are to do if they suspect that an unauthorized person is in possession of a firearm on campus. So I'll open this up to questions.
Any questions from the board?
All right.
We can bring that back on consent.
Moving on to next is hate-motivated behavior. This is an update from May of 2018 that expands the material related to collaboration, staff training, and enforcement of the rules regarding student conduct around hate-motivated behavior. It also calls out the use of the uniform complaint procedure when there's unlawful discrimination. So I'll open it up to questions.
Board, any questions or comments? Okay. We're good on that.
Moving on to married and pregnant or parenting students. What this did primarily was authorize excused absence for parenting students when their own child is sick. So previous to this, that would have been an unexcused absence if they took off time for their the illness of their own child. It also expands their parental leave time to 8 weeks and or longer if deemed medically necessary. The most significant change in this law is that previous to this, students who were on parental leave were required to continue completing their schoolwork during their parental leave. So they would be granted home instruction and would have a tutor working with them during that time. The change here allows them, or requires schools and allows them to make up that work after they return from their parental leave. That extends both to both parents, not just the one giving birth. So any questions on that?
I'd just say from an early care experience, I really appreciate that, the time needed to be bonding with your child and the fact that it includes both parents.
Absolutely. That was specifically the rationale behind it, is that is a very important bonding time.
Dr. Reed?
I'm just curious, when did this policy, was this a CSBA policy that just came up, or has this been from a while?
There's always been, always, the policy has existed for a long time, but what it has done is updated the law to expand that parental leave and to provide new guidance to schools around the support of parenting students after the birth of their child. And,
so,
yeah.
There was just no date, so I didn't know.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Yes, this goes back to this policy first came about March of 2000.
Wow. But I mean, it was updated in 2016,
right?
But this is from 2016.
This is updating the 2016 update.
Yes. Okay, and it's a recent update from CSBA. I guess
yes.
I just am curious when the update from CSBA was.
Oh, let me see. It should be in the...
It's in the title of the document, December 2018.
Oh, okay.
Was when we received the update from CSBA.
Yeah, I'm glad that we moved quickly. I mean, this is not a year, you know what I mean?
Right.
So we're really impacting the lives here.
Right, and I would say, well, I'll comment on that when I go to our next policies, because we have not been timely in those. So, but yes, this is a recent law. Any other questions or comments?
Additional questions?
All right. So moving on to board policy. These are in the 6000 series. The first is related to education of students under Section 504. The most significant change, and again, so this goes to this was updated. The CSBA update was in 2016, December 2016. We are just getting to the update in board policy, but what I want the board to know is that we have been following the law, even though the board has not been updated. So, for example, students with disabilities allowed to participate in extracurricular, athletic, and non-academic programs. So, extracurricular activities such as, for example, a student who has an IEP but wants to participate in after-school sports and needs accommodations in order to participate. The IEP doesn't extend into the extracurricular or extended day after school, but the new policy, as of 2016, says that you would then create a 504 for that student to allow them to access those extracurricular activities. The other piece added in the policy is are a number of procedural safeguards and required notifications to parents. And again, we have been following those legal guidelines. So we've been aligned in the practice, but we did not update the policy.
Any questions from the board? Bring that back to consent.
Thank you. And finally, education for homeless children. This was another 2016 CSBA update that we are just getting around to formalizing. But again, we have been following the law with our practices. The policy includes new material on the designation of a district liaison for homeless children and youth. That liaison, I am that liaison. It's also the identification of homeless students and the confidentiality of their records, their living situations, coordination of services, etc. So it's about keeping their confidentiality. And again, we have been following those practices. So any questions?
No questions.
Thank you very much, Board.
Thank you.
Are you ready for the exciting stuff of HR?
Of course.
Okay. Good evening, Board. All right. The first, it looks like Brian has queued up the 4140 sequence of board policies. This is really an update related to Janus decision and SB 866. And so I'll highlight a couple points in here that I think are worth mentioning, then open it up for questions. This does address payment of fees and the changes with respect to payment of fees. I think you'll see that in the end of the actual. It used to be in the beginning. I think they've switched it back to the end of the board policy. I can speak to that if you need clarification. It also highlights the change in mass communication and our actual obligation to meet and confer with the unions. It speaks to access, the union access to new employee orientations. And also it puts into place in board policy that obligates us not to disclose the time, date, and location of those new employee orientations. We are obligated under this policy to supply contact information to the unions. And then it speaks to payroll deduction of member dues, and we are obligated to do the payroll deduction. We get that information from the union. They give us a list of who and how much to deduct now. So that's how we operate post-Janus.
Okay. Any questions? Ms. Ford?
Just clarification. I think any employee in a bargaining unit can ask not to have their contact information shared with the bargaining unit, right? I thought I read it.
You know, I'd have to check on that and get back to you. I'm not sure I read that in the board policy, but
let me just see.
Oh, it's on page 5, 5 of 7. Yes, it does provide for a written request that the notification or that information not be disclosed to the union. You see that about halfway down on, okay, so it's in there.
Any questions, further comments? We can have this come back on consent.
Okay, professional leaves. This, actually the next two, I believe they're probably queued up together. So 4161.3 and 4261.3 are virtually identical board policies. One deals with certificated and the other deals with the classified. There's a couple subtle differences. We're on 4161.3. These are really about professional leaves and the fact that we do allow for employees to put forward a proposal to the board to request professional leave. It would be for the purpose of study and travel that will benefit the district. There's some requirements that they have to meet in terms of the time in which they've worked for our district, the amount of time. You see that in there. Also, the consecutive amount of time. And I think on the certificated side, this is one of the differences between the two policies. On the certificated side, they are obligated to serve the district. I think it was twice the amount of time that they were granted professional leave. Looking at 4261.3, I just want to see if I should point out anything different in that. That is the certificated. This one does allow, it talks about paid leave, but it does allow for there to be agreement that it is not paid leave as well. So I wanted to make sure the board knew about that.
Any comments or questions from the board? Ms. Ford?
I'm sorry, I may have read it too quickly. Going back to the certificated leave, does the policy address what the certificated employee has a right to on return?
Yeah, it does.
What does it say?
It states that they do have a right to the position that they were in when they were granted the leave, which is different from some of our leaves of absences where they're guaranteed a position somewhere in the district. But this board policy actually states they are guaranteed their position back.
At the same school?
Yeah, same position.
100%. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about elementary, and I'm not sure exactly how it works in terms of grade level assignment. I would think it's at elementary, it would be the assignment back to the site, but not necessarily in that grade level teaching assignment. Or the room.
You've had experience with that.
All right, what's next? Brian, I only have one left, so process of elimination, I should be able to figure it out, but
4200. Yeah.
4200.
Yeah.
Oh, this one seemed like a pretty straightforward update. This is just kind of defines our classified employees as non-certificated, that they should undergo regular performance evaluations per our contract. And it talks about short and long-term sub-assignments, and I think this policy ensures that the length of that short-term assignment doesn't exceed, I think it was 185 or 195 days, something like that. So,
any questions from the board? No question. Bring those back on consent.
Will do. Thank you.
Mr. Motzilker, you have some comments?
So I'll summarize. We went through 22 board policies. Before we came in tonight, our backlog was 70. So now we're down to 48. Progress. CSBA keeps feeding us new ones. So it's like, okay, catch up. This was our second special board meeting. We'll get better at front loading. The last one we could have gotten you more. We recognize that. This is the last special board meeting devoted to board policy. We'll try to get some of the urgent ones on our regular board meetings, but we know that the next 5 board meetings are going to be pretty full as we close out the year. I can just comment, I think this was a good structure for us to move into because it's so hard to get to policy at 10 o'clock at night. We keep punting it down the road. So appreciate the board's time. It was an hour and 20 minutes. If we could do this, I would say next year we should try to get some of these on the calendar and let's just keep catching up. So it's really good from our point of view.
Any final comments from the board? Okay, so do I have, our next meetings are scheduled for Tuesday, April 23rd, followed by May 14th, and Tuesday, May 21st. So we're going down the stretch there. So a motion to adjourn. Oh, Ms. Ford?
I would like to make a suggestion. I noticed on the website and on the information that we got that that it doesn't actually say when closed session begins. And I think it's important for the public to know when closed session begins and the fact that there is the opportunity for public comment in closed session.
On the website itself, but it is on the agenda. It's
No,
on
it's not on the agenda.
on this particular agenda because usually it does have it on there. So I just wondered if it's intuitive.
okay.
Yes.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
I just think on the I checked the website
Yeah.
and it doesn't have it on
And
the
it's
website.
it's not here either. I think it may have been the last thing, but normally it's on the agenda as well.
either. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, motion to adjourn.
Second.
So we are adjourned at 6:50. Have a nice evening. Thank you for coming.